welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Mann, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned when you're researching these upcoming MMA events. We got plenty of fighter profiles on there, approaching 3,500 as of right now, spanning over 17 different promotions, and we have the entire schedule laid out in our pinned post so you guys can see what the schedule is like upcoming, and then click on each fighter to access direct links to their past fights. So all your researching is that much easier. There's a reason I am the best in the world at finding footage on all of these fighters. Check it out for yourself for free with a 7-day free trial available with a link in the description below. Again, that is the MMA Fight Archive. All right. I appreciate the understanding regarding the tardiness of this podcast this week. Obviously, we had an off week last week following the big UFC 300 card. Obviously, was researching the regional events we had last week, I believe 4 of which that I covered. And then I was also finishing up some housework in regards to some new flooring that we were putting in throughout the house. That caused a lot of disruption in my effectiveness in terms of staying on top of my work, on top of throwing on a slab of paint all over the house as well. So a ton of work, very exhausting, mentally draining, physically exhausting. And I really didn't want to give a half-ass effort in terms of my researching for the card. So I did my best to get my researching done as effectively as I could, as efficiently as I could, and it brought me pretty much Thursday of fight week, which is right now, and thought I'd still be able to record the podcast for you guys. Not as many bells and whistles as you guys are used to seeing in the usual Lawcast episode that I drop on Mondays, but that should be back in full swing on next Monday, I believe, in preparation for, I believe it's the next pay-per-view is next week. I could be off on that. Let me just quickly check here. UFC 301, May 4th. Yes, so the next event is actually going to be the Brazil pay-per-view, headlined by the flyweight title between Alexandre Pantoja and Steven Erceg. But I still want to drop the breakdown for you guys. The lock of the night, top 3 lock of the night, top 3 dog of the night candidate videos will be added to the ending of this podcast. So it'll be one podcast. I'll obviously have the timestamps in case you guys want to flip straight to that. And then the free parlay Lockheed 2-step Lockheed Trinity videos, as well as the 3 best prop bet videos, will drop tomorrow, aka Friday, as normal. So keep your eyes peeled for that. So let's quickly go over the recap. So we've had 2 weeks since I've done a recap here. Obviously, didn't have a UFC event last week, so I did not have a recap to give you guys last week. So what I'm going to do is just to give you guys a recap of the UFC event that we had, which was pretty successful. So let's start off with the lock of the night play for UFC 300. It came in the form of Arman Tsarukyan, who had a closer fight than I expected with Charles Oliveira. I think that, that stumble in that first round to give Charles Oliveira that very close submission attempt kind of made this fight a lot closer than it should have been. I expected Oliveira to win that first round for him to have his most success there, but I really expected in the second and third rounds for Tsarukyan to take over, and I thought he did. He had a dominant second round. The third round was looking pretty good for him, except that Darce choke that Charles Oliveira locked in. But I don't think that was even close to being completed, which still allowed us to go out there and cash the lock of the night play in the form, like I said, of Arman Tsarukyan. Quickly just touching on the lock of the night plays. Over the last 2 weeks, we went 5-1 on the lock of the night plays, and that now brings our lock of the night record to 28-17 on the year for a 62% hit rate, getting right back on track after a sluggish first quarter in terms of lock of the night plays. So I hope to keep that rolling for you guys. Dog of the night for UFC 300 was the only dog that, and actually I had a few dog plays, but this was one of the ones that did not hit. That was in the form of Sodiq Yusuff plus 120 going up against Diego Lopez. I did not expect Diego Lopez to knock him out so quickly. I expected Yusuff to showcase a little bit more discipline in the striking realm and then eventually really start to turn it on Lopez in the second and third rounds. He was unable to do so and he got knocked out early, so we have to rip up our dog of the night ticket there. Dog of the night's not great over the last 2 weeks where we had 6 events, and I believe I got reverse swept there. So that now brings our dog of the night record to 16-29 on the year for a 35% hit rate. Need to get that bad boy up if I want to keep the last year's run of having a solid profit on the dog of the nights. If I want to keep that up, I need to turn things around there. Again, very unfortunate considering that I had Max Holloway as a dog play, I had Renato Moicano as a dog play on that UFC 300 card, but I unfortunately gave the moniker of dog of the night to Sodiq Yusuff, and I have to rip that up. All right, let's look at the last few plays here for UFC 300 to recap. Starting at the top, Alex Pereira comes through for us to cash for 1.5 units as he knocks out Jamal Hill in the first round. Very happy about that, and we could potentially cash against Jamal Hill 2 times in a row in 2024, depending on how the Khalil Roundtree fight ends up shaking out, which he has quickly rebooked himself for June. A little bit quick of a turnaround, in my opinion. I had a 0.5 unit shot on Yan Xiaonan at plus 385 against Weili Zhang. I expected to see a little bit better takedown defense and get-ups from her. She seemed to rally back in that third round, but unfortunately, that gave Weili Zhang the time that she needed to bounce back into the matchup and then really start to take over and win that fight. But plus 385, I didn't think it was a bad spot pre-fight. Co-main event, third fight from the top. Max Holloway comes through for us at plus 137. Pretty much dominates Justin Gaethje throughout that entire fight, leading up to what could be the most iconic moment in UFC history, where he points to the ground and eventually knocks out Justin Gaethje with 1 second left on the clock. That also allowed us to cash our round 5 Holloway prop at plus 2,900 for plus 2.9 units. Very happy about that. Obviously, I have to rip up the round 3 and round 4 props. But again, at 0.2 units combined, I'm okay, especially considering, through those props, we were able to net plus 2.7 units there. Covered the lock of the night in Sarukian. Was feeling really good about Alexander Rakic until he broke under the pressure of Prochazka. Insane the durability on Prochazka, considering the clean shots that he was eating from Rakic through the first 6 or 7 minutes of that matchup. But Prochazka showcases his samurai spirit, walks through all of that nonsense, even walks through all those big calf kicks that he was eating. I was hoping that we would see Rakic look to take the fight to the ground to really keep Prochazka on his back and away from utilizing his power, but Rakic had different plans and he ended up paying for it, so we have to rip up a 1.2 unit ticket there. Talked about the dog of the night, Sodiq Yusuff going down for us. Renato Moicano comes through for us. Looked very scary in that first round when Jalen Turner knocked him down, but unfortunately Turner did not follow up on that, allowing Moicano to battle back into that fight and then eventually get that position that he needed in the second round to get that TKO finish. I was hoping it would come by submission, but regardless, plus 198 on a fighter as talented as Moicano. We know he needs to really trim up that striking defense a bit, but once he's able to get his opponents to the ground, this guy is a very, very difficult fighter to deal with. So cash that plus 198 ticket. Kayla Hurston to win inside the distance, plus 125. Very easy hit there, considering how much she was just mashing up Holly Holm on the mat. Very happy to see her go out there and come through on that play for us. So all in all, UFC 300 plus 8.35 units for a 63% ROI. Very happy with that performance. Over the last 2 weeks, including UFC 300, we were up just about 5 units over the 6 events that we had once you put everything together. Octagon 56 was a success for us. Cage Warriors 171, slight loss. PFL 3, slight loss there as well. ACA 174, pretty much in the black there. In the black for PFL 2 as well. So in terms of events, we went 2 and 4, but luckily we earned enough units on those 2 winning events to still have us up about 5 units over the last 2 weeks. All right, the UFC circus is back in full swing. Like I said, this week we got UFC Vegas 91 going down, headlined by Alex Perez and Matthias Nicolau in a high-stakes flyweight matchup. I believe that's it in terms of the recaps. Yes. I will also have LFA breakdowns for you guys strictly on the Patreon page. So if you guys are digging regional promotions, you guys can check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Link for that in the description below. I'll have written breakdowns and official plays for that card posted by pretty much Friday afternoon, well in advance of the LFA card kicking off later that evening. Also, you'll be able to get early access to the Lockheed Two-Step and Lockheed Trinity parlays, which cashed for us pretty well last week on both ends there. I usually drop those on Mondays. Obviously, this week, a very weird week considering everything going into it, but normally I drop the the Lockheed Two-Step and Lockheed Trinity parlays for you guys on Monday evenings. And lastly, shout out to the Godzilla Wins folks, providing me a platform to drop written content for the public. The main event articles usually drop on Wednesdays or Thursdays, and then the 3 best moneyline spots normally drop on Thursdays or Fridays. I will have links to those in the description below. Otherwise, just check out GodzillaWins.com, not just for MMA, but also for all your other great sports needs. They have a great crew over there. Make sure you guys check them out. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get into the first spot that we got. First fight of the night going to be between Gabriel Benitez, who comes in at plus 160, Maheshate coming in at minus 200. Benitez is about 1.5 months removed or short of his 36th birthday. He's looking to bounce back after losing to Jim Miller back in January, a fight in which he got swept on the scorecards until Jim Miller was able to put him away in the 3rd round. Benitez is normally a southpaw striker that likes to rip his power leg to the body of his opponents, follow up with some combinations, and really chip away at them, but he hasn't really had the highest levels of wins dating back to 2015 when he defeated Clay Collard. Since then, he's won 5 fights and obviously lost a bunch in the meantime as well, but not against high-level competition, nor even against guys that are even in the UFC. It seems like he has a clear ceiling in terms of the guys he's been able to defeat and the guys that he'll come up short against, and I expect him to come up short against his opponent this weekend, 24-year-old Chinese prospect Maheshate. Maheshate is actually 1-2 through his 3 UFC fights thus far, currently on a 2-fight losing streak, most recently getting knocked out by Vyacheslav Borshev last year. He's taken a little bit of time off, now has aligned himself with Fight Ready MMA, which is what I think is the perfect team for him to join, considering his size, his skill set, and his ability to utilize his long-range striking approach to hurt his opponents and put them away. In this matchup against Benitez, he'll have a 4-inch height advantage. Reach is pretty much the same here, but I think his ability to establish that range with his footwork and his straight shots down the middle will cause Benitez a lot of trouble. I believe that will eventually see Maheshate counter Benitez effectively here and line up that knockout shot, putting Maheshate back into his winning ways and dropping Benitez into a losing streak. Give me Maheshate by knockout. Next up, we got Ivana Petrovic coming in at minus 500. She goes up against Liang, who comes in at plus 360. Petrovic had an unsuccessful UFC debut back in July when she ended up coming up short against Luana Carolina. That was a matchup where Carolina was able to outgrind her through the first 2 rounds and had some success in the 3rd as well. But that's normally the way that Petrovic ends up winning her fights, by taking her opponents to the ground and grinding them out from that top position until the finish eventually opens itself up for her. But I think she's been a little bit overrated due to the level of competition that she was facing on the regional scene, and just seeing how she dealt with a fighter like Luana Carolina, not the greatest of looks. It could also be the UFC jitters coming into this promotion and ending up underperforming compared to what she usually showcases. Her opponent this weekend, Liang, is winless in the UFC, going 0-3 since joining the promotion in 2021, but this fighter is all gas, no brakes. Of her 26 professional fights, only 1 of them has gone to the scorecards, and 20 of them have finished inside the 1st round. She's been unable to showcase that finishing style in the UFC, as she has been finished through her 3 fights, twice in the 2nd round, and first by knockout by Silvana Gomez Juarez. And that just showcased that she has very bad striking defense. Where she does her best work is when she's able to get the opponents to the ground with sneaky trips and throws, and then from there is able to get to a dominant position pretty quickly to open up finishing opportunities for herself. She kind of reminds me of Bellator or PFL's Kana Watanabe with her ability to take her opponents to the ground, but Liang does not have as good of a gas tank as Watanabe does, and that leads to Liang really gassing out and allowing her opponents to assert dominant position and end up finding the finish themselves. I'm expecting violence to continue in Liang's career this weekend, as I do expect this fight to finish inside the distance. And I think taking a shot on Liang at plus 500 to win inside the distance is not a bad look either, considering the takedown defense issues that we've seen from Petrovic throughout her career, and namely in her last fight against a striker in Luana Carolina. I think Liang could open up some finishing opportunities for herself if she's able to get this fight to the mat early, and I think that's absolutely possible in this fight. Liang's very aggressive when she's able to establish that top position, and she does a great job in terms of asserting a dominant position, and I think that will eventually open up a finishing opportunity for herself. There is no way you can trust Petrovic at minus 500 against somebody as aggressive as Liang, especially when we've seen the flaw in Petrovic's game is normally what the strength is in Liang's game. So I'm going to go against the grain here. I'm going to take Liang. I think she wins this fight inside the distance. I think maybe going Liang round 1 or Petrovic round 2/round 3. Not a bad way of approaching this fight, but I'm just taking Liang straight up at her inside the distance line at plus 500. I think that's more of a good enough gamble there. I think the chalk on the fight doesn't go to decision is not a bad look either, but I'm expecting violence. I'm expecting Liang, though, to eventually get her first UFC win. Next up, we got James Llontop coming in at minus 450, going up against short notice UFC debutant Chris Padilla, who comes in at plus 340. I do like Llontop in this spot, as I expect his pressure and pace that he normally implements in his fights to catch up with the newcomer. Llontop is a guy who comes from Peruvian roots and has showcased that he is a very difficult, specifically in his Contender Series matchup that he won back in September, when he was able to really just grind on Malik Lewis and do pretty much everything except finish Lewis. He got a couple 10-8s on the scorecards, but ultimately he wins that fight on the scorecards. Very pressure-heavy fighter, loves to move forward, loves to grind his opponents in the clinch, take them to the ground, and just keep working to get a dominant position and try to finish his opponents. I like what I see from him. What he lacks in technical expertise, he makes up for in pace, pressure, and cardio. His opponent, Chris Padilla, started off his career 7-0 and was given a big opportunity in RFA back in 2016, but ended up coming up short against James Gonzalez, who went on to fight for the UFC in his next fight. Padilla then went 3-5 over his next 8 fights, losing to a couple more fighters that ended up going to the UFC after beating Padilla. And now Padilla has turned things around in 2023, where he ended up going 3-0 and had positioned himself for a high-stakes regional MMA fight next month for Uriah Faber's A1 Combat Fighting against Chris Gonzalez. But luckily for him, a short notice opportunity appeared in the UFC, and he jumped right at it, hoping that at 28 years old, he can really start to make the success that he had from the beginning portion of his career. He's explosive, he has some solid power, but I think the majority of his wins have come against mediocre competition. The last win that he has on his record is against former UFC fighter who we all know probably didn't deserve to be in the UFC to begin with, Justin James. But I think that Llontop is going to be able to deal with the early pressure of Padilla. I think that he'll be able to walk through some of that big knockout power and then eventually really start to wear on Padilla up against the cage, dragging him to the ground and just overwhelming him with volume and output. I was surprised that Llontop was unable to finish Malik Lewis, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's unable to finish Padilla, but I think now that he's at this level, and given the circumstances regarding the short notice nature of this fight for Padilla, I think we'll see Llontop really turn up the volume in the second and third rounds and get a TKO victory over Padilla. Minus 450 kind of makes sense in this spot. Still a little bit wide, especially considering he's fighting somebody that has the background and of experience that Padilla has, but I think that Llontop will just be too much for him in the spot, and I think he ends up overwhelming him and finishing him in the second or third round. Next up, we got Mann coming in at plus 280, going up against Souza, who comes in at minus 375. Mann lost her Dana White Contender Series fight back in 2022 to Bruna Brazil, where she got knocked out by a head kick after having some solid grappling success early. She won a fight on the regional scene and then eventually got a short notice call up to fight Josephine Knudsen back in September. She went 0 of 2 on takedowns that night and ended up getting grinded out by the more physically imposing and durable Josephine Knudsen. Mann's issue is that exactly. If she cannot provide the physical bullying that she's used to applying against her opponents, she will likely end up coming up on the short end of the stick. She likes to rely on her wrestling, looking to get opponents to the ground and grinding them out from that top position. But at this level, she's going to be fighting some very difficult opponents in terms of the strength and physicality they bring to the table. Her opponent this weekend, Souza, came up short in her UFC debut as she actually, I believe, tore her knee against Silva, who fights later on this card, and she forced Souza to sit on the sideline for about 10 months before she ends up making her return this weekend. She seems to be a decent all-around fighter, does a decent enough job in terms of skirting around at distance and utilizing her output to touch up her opponents, but she doesn't really jump off the page in terms of being anything super special. Yes, she won the Invicta FC flyweight title before jumping over to the UFC, but I still don't know if she has much of a future with the UFC, at least in terms of the level that she can bring to the table. This might not be a bad spot to take a little bit of a flyer on a big dog in Mann, who has showcased that she could utilize her wrestling to really overwhelm Souza. Souza has a sketchy takedown defense game, and that could play right into Mann's style, but if Mann is unable to get this fight to the ground, things could get shaky pretty quickly. But at minus 375, I would much rather take the plus 280 on the Mann side, as we've seen her have strengths where Souza has shown flaws in the past. The real thing where, the rubber hits the road is if Mann can actually keep Souza to the mat. Given the odds, given everything going into this matchup, I'm going to lean Mann here ever so slightly, and I think she ends up grinding this fight out and winning it on the scorecards. Again, very low confidence here, and I can already imagine the comments section here giving me crap about this pick, but Souza is nothing special in my opinion. I think the odds are just a little bit too wide in this spot, and I do think that Mann has the wrestling advantages to have her success, and I don't think Souza has the physicality that a fighter like Knudsen or Bruno Brazil were able to showcase against Mann. So give me Mann and Mann by decision. Next up, we got Don'Tale Mayes coming in at plus 100, going up against Machado, who comes in at minus 120. I just want to say, remember when everybody, and I'm sure I was on this train as well, was betting Don'Tale Mayes against Hamdi Abdelwahab, only for him to go out there and lay a goose egg and get grinded out in that matchup? Yeah, that's Don'Tale Mayes in a nutshell. He's a guy that a lot of people believe in, but when the rubber meets road, and I might have used that phrase a little bit too much already, he's unable to really get much done. Yes, he knocked out Andrei Arlovski a couple fights back, and yes, he can go 15 minutes showcasing decent durability, but it just seems like he has that quit in him. He's an all-around heavyweight who can go 15 minutes, who has showcased decent striking and decent grappling, but when another fighter is able to go out there, get his respect, and pretty much command the action in the cage, he usually ends up letting them do so and ends up coming up on the losing end. I get it. He comes from a great camp and he has all these positives in terms of the experience that he brings to the table, but I just don't think he does well against guys that can provide enough resistance. And I think that's what he's getting this weekend in the form of Machado. I've really harped on Machado in the past, and I bet against him pretty heavily last time around with Mick Parkin, and that fight played out a little bit closer than I expected it to, and I think a lot of that has to do with the aggressiveness of Machado, and I think he will have learned a good enough lesson in that Parkin fight to try to assert himself a little bit more. He's a BJJ black belt, but he does his most work when he's able to really just follow or stalk his opponents, pressure his opponents, and put big strikes on them. And I think that's going to cause Don'Tale Mayes some issues here. Although Machado doesn't have the most amount of experience, or at least the level of experience that Mayes has brought to the table in the past, I think he will still end up struggling against a guy like Machado, who will be dictating the pace and pretty much being on the front foot the entire way. I don't think Mayes' wrestling advantage in this matchup will keep Machado on his back for too long. I think we'll see Machado get back to his feet if he is taken down, and I think we'll see him get back to the pressure style and really put some big punches on Mayes and possibly even finish him in the second or third round of this matchup. It's crazy to see the amount of line movement that has come in on Machado, going from plus 150 to now around that minus 120, minus 130 range, but I think it's for good reason. people may try to bank on the experience of Mays in this spot, but I do think Machado will be the one leading the dance here, and I think it opens up a finishing opportunity for him in the second or third round. Next up, we got Austin Hubbard coming in at plus 145, going up against Michal Figlak, who comes in at minus 175. Last time around for Hubbard, we saw him lose in the Ultimate Fighter finale to Kurt Holobaugh, a fight in which he had a decent first round, taking Holobaugh to the ground and grinding him out from that top position, but it started to get harder for him in the second round as the pace, pressure, and power of Holobaugh started to catch up to Hubbard, opening up that eventual submission opportunity where Hubbard was forced to tap. Now, Hubbard normally has a solid cardio style where he's able to put pressure and pace on his opponents with a newly acquired wrestling skill set that he's been utilizing since being originally released from the UFC. He won a couple fights on the regional scene, including winning a regional belt that ultimately put him on the Ultimate Fighter, where he made it to the finale utilizing that wrestling style, but ultimately it was not enough for him to overcome Kurt Holobaugh. He's still a solid fighter. He throws with a lot of heat, especially in his kicks, hence his nickname Thud, but I do think that this is a guy that's still capable of having good wins inside the UFC. His opponent, Michal Figlak, returns to the UFC after going 8-0 on the regional scene and then picking up a loss in his UFC debut against Ferocium. That was back in 2022, and I don't think it was that great of a look for him, considering he got out-grappled by a striker over the course of 15 minutes. Figlak is a decent all-around fighter, good striking, good pace, and good grappling, but it doesn't seem like he has what it takes to get to that next level. He's only 27 years old, and with that amount of time that he's taken off, maybe he's improved and he's gotten better. Maybe he improved his confidence as well. But I think the more experienced fighter here in Austin Hubbard and the style that he brings to the table with his wrestling and mixing his wrestling behind his striking will cause Figlak some issues once again, and that will allow Hubbard to grind him out from that top position. I don't think Figlak provides the resistance or the pressure that we saw from Holobaugh, which ended up breaking Hubbard, and I think that will allow Hubbard to pretty much dictate the pace of this fight, take this fight where he wants it, but ultimately grinding it out from that top position and winning this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up we got Yahya, the ageless Yahya, coming in at plus 340, going up against Victor Henry, who comes in at minus 450. We'll start off on the Yahya side, who's entering his 21st UFC fight, just half a year short of his 40th birthday. We know what he's all about. He likes to take fights to the ground, utilizes BJJ, whether it's to control his opponents or eventually open up a submission opportunity. Yahya is very difficult when he gets a hold of his opponents, and he's just so sneaky in terms of engaging in the grappling and finding ways to get his opponents to the ground, especially with his lacking takedown game. His opponent this weekend, Victor Henry, had an unfortunate result in his last matchup where he went up against Javid Basharat, and the fight was stopped due to an accidental groin shot that Henry was unable to recover from. Henry is a fighter that utilizes an all-around game, comes from a great training camp headed by Josh Barnett. We've seen him utilize a lot of movement, striking, and output to get his wins, but his defensive grappling has shown that it's high level. It's at a spot where he's able to keep fights upright, causes opponents to work, and then eventually get back to his own output, volume, striking style. I think he wins this matchup. Minus 450 is just a little bit too much for me to plot against a guy like Yahya. Like his last matchup he had against Montel Jackson, and Jackson showed that his physicality and power was too much for Yahya. But Victor Henry doesn't provide a whole lot of threat in terms of the striking that he brings to the table. The majority of his finishes over the last couple of years have come by submission, and I would be very surprised if he actually ends up submitting Yahya here. The spot that I don't mind is the over 2.5 coming in at minus 150, as I think that we'll see that striking style from Victor Henry similar to what he used against Raoni Barcelos, chipping away at him from distance and then eventually winning the fight on the scorecards. But minus 450 is just a little bit too much. The over 2.5 or Henry by decision may be a little bit more plausible here, but Yahya could definitely shake things up by getting the grappling going and causing Victor Henry some issues just by being that nuisance that he normally is. Is there enough for me to take a shot at plus 340? Probably not, but I'm still going to predict Victor Henry here, and I think he ends up winning this fight on the scorecards. Next up, We got Tim Means coming in at plus 250 going up against Earl Schmedich, who comes in at minus 300. Now, Tim Means was really in need of a victory last time around, and he did exactly that by putting on a veteran performance and putting away Andre Fialho in the final round. Means is now 40 years old and has over 50 professional fights under his belt. You got to think that the miles are starting to catch up to him. And even though he hasn't been clearly knocked out since 2019, we've still seen him eat some big shots and have some bad reactions to it. Means is a solid output striker who utilizes all 8 limbs, does a great job in terms of utilizing his elbows and his knees in that close range, has some good combination striking from distance. But I think the best thing about him at this stage of his career is the amount of experience against high-level competition that he has and his ability to utilize that against guys that are still on the come-up. His opponent this weekend, Earl Schmedich, is just in my opinion, a much younger and less experienced version of Tim Means in terms of the way that he likes to utilize his Muay Thai to really hurt his opponents. Very unfortunate outcome for Medic last time around as he came up short against short-notice UFC debutant Miktybek Oralbai, who stepped in for Johnny Parsons back in November. And I think that was very unfair for Medic, who was expecting to fight a power-punching slugger and ended up getting a Kyrgyzstani wrestler who was just putting on a relentless pace on him and eventually submitted him in that second round. Medic is normally best when he's able to assert his dominance with his striking, with his range, and really just chopping away at guys with his knees and elbows when he does end up crashing the pocket. Clearly his takedown defense and grappling defense needs some work, but we saw some good things from him in that first round in terms of nullifying the amount of damage that Oralbai was able to inflict from that top position. Medic is ever improving, and I think he just needs to continue to accrue experience against high level of competition, and I think he will continue to distance himself from the fighter that I thought he was when he came into the UFC, which was pretty much a glass cannon. He was just beating up on the Alaska FC regional scene, and I really did not expect much from him when he came to the UFC, but he's been proving me wrong in certain spots. I was able to get him against Jalen Turner, but he's still been bouncing back and having some good opportunities and some good performances. And I think he can showcase to Tim Means that the game may be passing Means by. Minus 300 may be a lot to fade a guy of Tim Means' experience, but I think that Medic, as he continues to land and starts landing on Means, it's going to cause Means to, I think it will cause him to break, and I think that will eventually see Means actually get finished in this spot. So I do like Medic to go out there, really put a whooping on Means. Minus 300, a little bit tough to get on straight up here. Maybe a possible parlay piece, but maybe even honing in on Medic to win inside the distance. Not a bad way to go about it. Next up, we got Jonathan Pearce coming in at minus 160, going up against David Onama, who comes in at plus 130. Now, Jonathan Pearce is coming off a loss to Joanderson Brito in a fight that he was pretty much winning until he ended up giving up his neck and getting Brito to get the tap. Pearce is a guy that's been very difficult to deal with in terms of the grappling style that he brings to the table. Very smothering, especially when he's able to establish that dominant position and keep his opponents on their back. The issue that I've had with him in the past, and which is why I actually bet and predicted Brito against him last time around, was the fact that he seems to slow down later on in matchups, especially when he's having trouble keeping opponents on their back. I believing in his striking a little bit more, utilizing teeps up the middle just to eat up some time, and then getting to the takedowns later on in the rounds will benefit him a lot, especially in being able to lean on that grapple-heavy approach and really grinding on his opponents. He's very strong. He's very good when he does secure that top position. He has some sneaky chokes if he's able to find the openings there, but it's just his ability to manage his gas tank that has me a little bit wrapped up whether Pearce can actually break through to the next level or not. His opponent this weekend, David Onama, pulled off a pretty big upset last time around over Gabriel Santos, a fighter that I thought was really going to put Onama through the ringer and eventually finish him. Santos hurt him multiple times through the first 6 minutes of that matchup, but was unable to close the show, and it seemed to me like Santos emptied his gas tank, allowing Onama to battle back into that matchup and eventually find that big shot to put Santos down and out. It's clear Onama is improving. He is becoming a better fighter, and his defensive grappling is definitely leveling up. He is best when he's able to assert his dominance with his striking, considering the power that he brings to the table and the combinations in which he throws with. A lot of opponents struggle to strike with him and have much success of their own. He's obviously over there with the Factory X guys and Mark Montoya, which is a great training camp for a guy of his style, but I think he is going to continue to struggle with guys that could effectively implement their dominant grappling style, and that's what he's fighting this weekend in Jonathan Pearce. Things could get shaky late, though. Maybe a hedge on David Onama round 2 or round 3, not a bad way of going about it, but I think that we'll see a better version of Jonathan Pearce here, but still leaning on that grappling style to nullify David Onama's power punching style, keeping him on his back, pushing him up against the cage, and keeping him in uncomfortable positions. And then we see Pearce win this fight. He could possibly find the submission too, but I think it's ultimately going to be him winning this fight over 15 minutes and getting his hand raised on the scorecards. Next up, we got heavyweights going out of here as Austin Lane comes in at plus 230. He takes on Jonathan Diniz, who comes in at minus 300. Now, Austin Lane had a 6-fight winning streak snapped last time around when Justin Tafa knocked him out in September. I'm sure Lane is ready to move on with his career and bounce back at this point. And standing at 6'6" with an 80-inch reach is one of the more intimidating statures that comes into the heavyweight division. He does have some shortcomings in terms of the technique and power in which he throws, but his athleticism and just his frame overall has allowed him to go out there and bully most of his opponents and either defeat them on the scorecards or really run away with fights down the stretch. His chin, though, is just too much of an issue for me to get comfortable behind. Jonathan Diaz comes from a kickboxing background and started his professional MMA career at 6-0 until he eventually got that 5-0, which is when he got the Contender Series opportunity last time to defeat Eduardo Neves by knockout and earn that UFC contract. Diniz, very slick striker. This guy doesn't look like he chases the finish often, just waiting for it to eventually come to him with the combination striking style that he brings to the table. It doesn't seem like he winds up a whole lot on his shots, but is still able to put opponents on their butt and put them away, and it looks like he's starting to understand the defensive grappling aspect of mixed martial arts, which makes him an even more dangerous opponent. When opponents try to get the takedowns going, he digs the underhooks immediately. When he's pushed up against the cage, he does a great job in terms of spreading his space, and then when he finds the opportunity to pivot off, he does a great job of doing that, getting back out into open space, and then getting back to his striking style. His durability, high level as well. I think he has solid potential. It all just comes down if he can continue to improve that takedown defense and ensure that he's able to keep fights upright, because in the striking realm, more often than not, he'll have an advantage over his opponents. As much as I like Diniz, or liked him around that minus 230 range, it's still a little bit wide considering the experience advantage that Austin Lane brings to the table. Even if you were to look at Diniz to win by knockout, you're still having to pay minus 200, which might be a little bit too much here. I do like him to really dog walk Austin Lane in this fight, but I wouldn't count out Lane having the ability to possibly show some holes in Diniz's game that we have yet to see, which is why I'm ultimately going to have to pass on this matchup, but the prediction will remain the way you guys were expecting me to go here, and that's going to be Jonathan Diniz by knockout. All right, next up, we got Ariane Lipski coming in at plus 130, going up against Karine Silva, who comes in at minus 160. We need to give a hand to Ariane Lipski here in terms of the improvements and confidence that she showcased over the last couple of fights, especially considering that she turned out to be a dud when she originally came over as the KSW flyweight champion. She signed with the promotion back in 2019, went 3-5 over her next 8 fights, but since 2023, she's gotten the confidence, she's improved her skills enough, and now finds herself on a 3-fight winning streak and pulling off the upset in a couple of those matchups. Her last fight was very dominant against Casey O'Neill as she stopped the takedowns coming her way and battered O'Neill on the feet, eventually setting up that club and sub by armbar to complete the victory in the second round. It's really been her improvements in the takedown defense, which has allowed her to flow in the striking realm so effortlessly, which has kind of tapped back into that violence queen that we knew of her back in the KSW days. I think if she continues to showcase that takedown defense, she can take this thing further than most people expected, but we got to see it on a fight-by-fight basis. Her opponent this weekend, Karine Silva, knows nothing but finishes. She goes out there and continuously finishes her opponents, more often than not coming by submission. Last time around, she was able to get that impressive reversal and then that guillotine to get the tap and defeat her, the fighter that gave her last loss, I believe it was Marina Moroz. Silva needs a little bit more improving in terms of the striking realm, but she does a good enough job in terms of staying busy to eventually open up the trip takedowns or even just straight up takedowns that she has so that she can get to her aggressive BJJ game. But I think she has some holes that still need to be filled in regards to just improving that striking and blending the takedowns behind her striking as she continues to take steps up in competition. This one is going to be a big test for both of these women, as Lipski is going to be looking to take advantage of the striking deficiencies in Silva's game, while Silva is going to look to try to expose the takedown defense issues that have plagued Lipski in the first part of her UFC career. I am going to lean ever so slightly to the Lipski side, though, as I think that she has a good enough takedown defense game here to keep this fight upright. She has stuffed all 25 takedown attempts from her opponents over the last 5 fights. The only loss in that amount of time coming at the hands of Priscilla Cachoeira, who gave her no respect and pretty much punched her way into the pocket and eventually found that big shot to knock her out. Lipski still very, very dangerous, though. I think that she has all the confidence in the world here, and I think that confidence will continue to grow if she's able to maintain her footwork, her range, and her discipline, and beat up Silva from distance and eventually get her hand raised here on the scorecards. Silva's dangerous. Silva's tough to bet against, especially considering the run that she's on. But if we continue to see the takedown defense game that we've seen from Lipski as of late, this should be her fight and her fight to dictate. Give me Lipski and Lipski by decision. Co-main event time, we got Ryan Spann coming in at -190, going up against Bogdan Guskov, who comes in at +160. Last time around, Ryan Spann ended up losing a split decision to Anthony Smith, a fight that seemed like the momentum was really on his side after he shattered the orbital bone of Anthony Smith in the second round. But Smith did a great job in terms of utilizing his veteran experience to battle back in that third round and win that round on the scorecards for him to ultimately win the fight by decision. Spann, very powerful. We know what he does. He does a great job in terms of hurting his opponents early and putting them away. The deeper fights go, the less likely he is to end up getting his hand raised because he's just not used to going deep into fights. And that was just another case of it last time around when he lost to Anthony Smith. He's a power puncher, has a nasty choke game as well if opponents try to implement a desperation takedown attempt. And that's why he's been so dangerous, especially early in fights. His opponent this weekend, Guskov, managed to pull off the first win of his UFC career last time, where he knocked out Zach Paunga near the ending of the first round. And that was a fight where he showcased that he does deserve to be in the UFC roster. He ended up losing his UFC debut to Volkan Oezdemir, who was able to knock him out in the first round of their fight. And Guskov is a guy who may be similar to Ryan Spann in terms of utilizing his big power punching style to try to get early finishes, or he ends up starting to taper off and ends up losing to his opponents. Ryan Spann, I think, is going to have the athleticism, power, and speed advantage in this matchup, which should allow him to line up a knockout probably in the first 3 or 4 minutes. I'm hoping that this win ends up coming by knockout, as he does, like I said, have that sneaky submission game, and hopefully he doesn't cause any desperation takedowns out of Guskov, which could open up that submission ability for him. But I do think that we'll see Ryan Spann dictate the pace, really put the pressure on Guskov, and then eventually find that early finish here. Give me Spann and Spann by first round knockout. Main event time. Matheus Nicolau coming in -175, going up against Alex Perez, who comes in at +145. Now, Nicolau really came up short against the unorthodox style of Brandon Royval last time around, as he only landed 2 significant strikes that night before Royval uncorked that beautiful knee and caused the finish that night. Nicolau was actually expected to rematch Manal Cap earlier this year. Cap missed weight badly. The fight ends up getting canceled. He's supposed to fight Cap this weekend in the main event. Cap gets injured. Nicolau ends up staying on and takes on a short notice replacement. Nicolau is a BJJ black belt, but we don't often see him leaning on the grappling aspects of his game, as he normally looks to just strike it out with his opponents, utilizing combination striking and his nasty head kick as well, which has been very beneficial for him in the past. He's 4-1 since returning to the promotion in 2021, which includes a win over Manel Cap, which is why they were supposed to rematch, as Cap has made some improvements since that matchup as well. But Nicolau is still a guy looking to find or at least assert himself in the top 5 of this division so that he can eventually line himself up for a title shot. Alex Perez is a guy that probably won his last fight, even in a loss. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people, including myself, were writing Alex Perez as he came into that fight with Muhammad Makhayev, coming off of, an endless amount of pullouts and cancellations, missing weight, and just, the public perception of Perez was not that great going into that matchup. And he really turned it around. He put up a spirited effort. He won the second round on all 3 judges' scorecards, but minor mistakes in that third round allowed Makhayev to keep his winning streak alive, his undefeated record alive. But I think from a moral standpoint, it was a good win for Perez in terms of winning back some of the respect from the MMA public and showcasing that at 32 years old, he's still capable of competitive performances and could even, find himself aligning himself in a title shot once again if he's able to get a couple more wins under his belt. You guys got to remember, going into the Davis and Figueiredo fight back in November of 2020, Perez was a guy that continuously would come in as a big favorite because a lot of people expected him to have a ton of potential, especially with the wrestling that he would bring to the table. He'd have a nasty calf kick that he would hurt opponents from distance and then also be able to take them to the ground and do big damage from that top position. Again, a bunch of cancellations, some weird circumstances has really changed the public perception on him, but I think he's capable of having a resurgence in his career and really doing a great job in terms of establishing his style once again. I thought it was very promising that he quickly accepted a fight against Tagir Ulanbekov after his loss to Makhayev, and even more promising, the fact that he's taking this short notice opportunity against Nicolau in a main event 5-round fight. I lean Perez in this spot as well. Nicolau might be the technically better striker in this matchup, but Perez has the wrestling and grappling ability to keep Nicolau on his back and continuously cause Nicolau to throw up submissions or look for reversals. But Perez is very strong from that top position, and even as we saw in the Makhayev fight, and that should allow him to really keep Nicolau in bad spots. 25 minutes is a long time to try to keep that style going, and I think he's going to be successful in doing so here against Nicolau. He really has to mind his P's and Q's, stay sharp the entire way, get that calf kicking game going just so he can switch it up a bit, but I do think he'll eventually be able to get this fight to the ground, utilize his wrestling, and eventually win this fight on the scorecards, maybe even TKO if he can batter that lead leg enough in this spot. There you guys go. Full breakdown for UFC Vegas 91. Now let's quickly get into the top 3 lock of the night candidates that I have for you guys here, and then we'll end it off with the top 3 dog of the night candidates. Last time around, UFC 300, our lock of the night was Arman Tsarukyan, who cashes at -200. Over the last 2 weeks, we went 5-1 on lock of the night plays for plus 6.31 units and a 21% ROI. That improves our record now for the year to 28-17 for minus 15.96 units and minus 7% ROI. Again, doesn't look the greatest, but it's definitely a step in the right direction considering how the year started off with a lot of flubs and a lot of miscues and missteps on my end. Getting right back on track though, and this last 2 weekend recap is a good sign of that. So, top 3 lock of the night candidates, which the Patreon folks already know. So if you want to know which one I ended up going with, check the lock of the night Patreon page, or you guys can drop a comment below and try to guess it in the comment section. Obviously, I'm not going to let you know if you got it right or not, but out of these 3, I only ended up picking one of them. Which one will it be? All right, first candidate here is going to be Maheshate, coming in at -200 against Gabriel Benitez. There's a 12-year difference here, as Maheshate is 12 years younger to Benitez, but I really think his ability to establish his striking style is going to cause Benitez some issues. Like I said, Maheshate aligned himself with the Fight Ready camp, and I believe those guys have very solid striking coaches in the form of Eddie Cha, and Santino DeFranco is a great all-around coach as well. But I think that they're going to devise a great game plan here to get Benitez Benitez to walk into some big shots from Maheshate, which I believe will allow Maheshate to knock out Benitez and end up getting the dub here. And at minus 200, I do not mind taking a shot there. The second lock of the night play is Earl Schmedich coming in at minus 300. And yes, even though Tim Means has a tremendous experience advantage over him, I do think that means his time has passed. And he did defeat a prospect last time around in Andre Fialho, but we know Fialho is not that great. Medic is nasty, especially when he gets in his groove and especially when he's able to establish his power. And I think he'll be able to do that here against Tim Means. He'll be the faster and more powerful of the two. And as long as he doesn't get too discouraged by some of the output and volume of Means, Medic should be able to start walking him down, landing big shots, and then eventually knock him out. The third and final lock of the night candidate is going to be Ryan Spann coming in at minus 190 as he goes up against Bogdan Guskov. As I explained earlier, I think Spann will have the power, speed, and explosiveness advantage early, which will allow him to find a big shot against Guskov, putting Guskov on skates and eventually knocking him out. If Volkan Oezdemir can do it, I think Ryan Spann can do it as well. Minus 190, not too bad either. All right, moving over to the dog of the night candidates. Again, our last dog of the night in Sadiq Yusuf shit the bed at plus 120 at UFC 300. Even though I had Max Holloway and Renato Moicano that night, it was Yusuf who I entrusted with the dog of the night title, and he ends up flubbing the bag for us there. And again, the last 2 weeks, not great for dog of the night candidates. Over the 6 events, we go 0-6. We get reverse swept. Minus 6 units there, minus 100% ROI. Now that brings our record on the year to 16-29 for minus 6.91 units and minus 15% ROI. Let's get into the 3 dog of the nights that we have here, and hopefully we're able to catch this one or even the LFA one that I'll have for Friday evening. First candidate up is going to be Austin Hubbard, who comes in at plus 150 as he goes up against Michal Figlak. I think Hubbard has a good enough wrestling and grappling advantage here to keep Figlak battling off of his back. And if Figlak comes in with the same level of wrestling that he had, or same level of grappling as well that he had against a striker in Fairziam last time around, this will not look good for him at all. I think Hubbard's competitiveness in the striking will allow him to master takedowns well enough to get this fight to the ground and grind Figlak out from that top position. Plus 150, count me in. Second dog of the night candidate is going to be Ariane Lipski, who comes in at plus 130, going up against Karine Silva. Again, striker versus grappler matchup here, but I think the striker in Ariane Lipski has showcased good enough takedown defense. Like I said earlier in the podcast, her opponents are 0 of 25 in her last 5 fights in terms of trying to take her to the ground. I think she'll showcase that level of takedown defense once again, keeping this fight upright, battering Karine Silva on the feet, and winning this fight on the scorecards. The third and final dog of the night candidate is going to be in the main event as Alex Perez takes on Matthias Nicolau. I believe Perez is still capable of high-level performances, and considering the wrestling advantage I expect from him in this matchup, I think he can pretty much dictate where this fight takes place. I think he'll be able to stay out of any submission trouble, and I think he should be able to take this fight to the ground, maybe land some calf kicks while they're in the striking realm as well, but for the most part, look for Perez to dominate with his wrestling and win this fight on the scorecards and get that win that has eluded him for so long. Give me Alex Perez in the main event plus 150. Again, top 3 lock of the night candidates, top 3 dog of the night candidates. The Patreon folks know which of those 3 I have picked. You guys can find out too. Drop a comment below. Let me know what you guys are thinking on the breakdowns, on everything. Otherwise, I will see you guys again tomorrow for the free parlay, Lucky 2-Step, Lucky Trinity, as well as the 3 best prop bets. And hopefully next week, well, not hopefully, definitely next week, we'll be back on schedule. We'll drop in the podcast on Monday and all the segments as we normally do throughout the week. And the video and studio will be back up and running again as well. I'm sure you guys miss your Caramel Boy's face. And we'll have that on full display for you guys again next week. Good luck on all your action this weekend, folks. If you're looking for LFA breakdowns, Lock of the Night Patreon page, written breakdowns there for you guys. Check that out. Otherwise, I will see you guys again tomorrow for the other segments that I got. See you guys then. Peace.
Last thing.